Hello everyone and welcome to October. This month we are going to be discussing Carnival by Rawi Hage. Rawi Hage is a Canadian author. He was born in the 60s in Beirut and is now a resident of Montreal. Carnival is the story of an anonymous entity known as Fly. Fly was born in the circus, somewhere in Europe, to a trapeze artist and a flying carpet pilot. After the death of his mother and the disappearance of his father, he is raised by the bearded lady, moves to North America, and has lived out his adulthood as a transient cab driver. What I noticed immediately about this book was the format. There is no traditional punctuation for things like dialogue. This means that Fly is the sole narrator and he has complete control over the story and how it is delivered to us. Fly is childish and escapist, and he is masturbating all the time. Initially, I kind of saw this book as literary masturbation. There's purposely no conventional format, and much like masturbation, it is meant to be enjoyed inwardly and on your own. In that vein, I'm very surprised that there is no use of the word penis. He is very focused on masturbation, ejaculation, fetishization, sexual fantasy, but for some reason there can be no blatant mention of the genitalia with which Fly is so fascinated. The three main themes that popped out to me and that I want to talk about today are the allegory, the rebellion, and the relationships. So, Zainab, I concluded, do tell. What do you think? I have no problem with booze. I am a Muslim and I drink. Yes, I gathered that, but what do you think? Obviously, the man's comprehension of the text is very limited and literal. And yours is multi-layered, you're saying? Yes, the text can be read on many levels. Gnosis for the few, I said. Not for the few, Zainab said, but for the willing and able. Exclusivity, mystery, interpretation that is changeable and adaptable, I said. Even the most detrimental of verses should be accepted as an allegory for something wiser and bigger. The book itself acts very much as an allegory of Fly's nomadic existence. He goes to the trouble of differentiating himself and other cab drivers between spiders and flies. Spiders sit in their webs and wait, whereas flies, such as himself, go and buzz around and are constantly moving and progressing forward. He's constantly on the hunt and moving around and searching for people and places and things before he finally returns home to read and masturbate. Fly's first-person narrative talks about the creation of all things and how that they can be created through storytelling. A large portion of the book is Fly lying on his back on his father's carpet and imagining himself in different realities. I drove home. The money was enough to let me retire for 2 nights. In celebration of my wealth, I parked my car and ran upstairs and lay on my carpet. After I had battled a few barbaric armies, I declared to the people, Veni Vidi Vici. The reception in Rome after our successful military campaign was magnificent. The horses, the slaves, the looting, and my proud soldiers shouting my name brought wind to my chest. He imagines his life as an allegory on Abrahamic proportions. Reading through the allegories and reading his responses to people like Zainab and the Christian soldier in the back of his cab, you have to ask yourself a lot of questions, like, was he actually raised by a bearded lady? Was his mother actually a trapeze artist? Is his magic carpet actually just a prayer mat that he defiles? And is this act possibly a way of getting back at or connecting with his absent father? No, she said, nothing needs to be changed. The verses should simply be read in their proper context. Change when it is convenient, stasis when it is not. Often the book seems to be critiquing Testament, and specifically the Quran, as well as those who read those tales and read those extremely unlikely scenarios and accept them for face value. These two, I thought, are no rebels. It is obvious that they have never been on the barricades of protesters and revolutionaries. They have never waved flags through the tear gas of a nation-state. They have never charged with stones and sticks to break down the fences that protect the men in suits, the diggers of gold beneath the indigenous' soil, the oil thieves in boardrooms, and the politicians behind citadel walls. The first rule of resistance is to keep your eyes open and protect your nose from the smell of defeat when the waft of power comes to separate you from your brothers in arms. In my boat that night, I carried 2 screaming, defeated cheerleaders. Rebellion and defiance are a huge theme peppered throughout pretty much every page of this book. Defiance of traditions, defiance of religion, defiance of sexuality, and defiance of conventional storytelling. In spite of the best efforts of both narrator and author to break free of a lot of this oppression, I couldn't help but notice that there was a lot of objectification and sexualization of all the women that appeared in this book. Whether it's poor Zeneb, who just lives in the same building as Fly, and he has this borderline stalker crush on her and constantly harasses her to spend time with him. Whether it's Aisha, who, despite being this important member of the community and a mover and shaker in the grassroots rebellion community that she's a part of, is constantly seen and referenced to the reader as this vulnerable, feminine ideal. Or whether it's Linda the prostitute being beaten nearly to death by her pimp. The world doesn't change much. There will always be a just fight and a cause to die for. What? Doesn't this completely devalue their lifestyle? This is Aisha talking to Otto when they are deciding that they're going to go live at the cottage that she's inherited, and they're going to step away from the city life and step away from all the movements that they have been a part of. And when I read that line, I actually questioned, like, are they just activists for the sake of being activists? Or are these the words of a defeated fighter, someone who is looking for a new scene and knows that they can't just retire and they can't just decide to stop fighting without feeling guilty? I found a lot of the text to be fairly black and white. The majority of the relationships within the book were pretty much binary oppositions. And I also had some problem with some of his relationships. For instance, I found it odd that he became unofficially Z's personal driver. The economics of that just don't work whatsoever, so I'm not really sure why the guy didn't just hire a private driver and was cool to call a freelance cabbie instead. Within the book, you had pretty severe types of people. At the very base of it, you have the impoverished, lonely, low-income cab driver and his high-income clients. As a taxi driver, you have the spiders versus the flies. As clientele, you have the jocks versus the prostitutes. On the periphery, there is Otto versus the cops, and then Otto versus the medication, and essentially counterculture versus the establishment. In his home life, you have Zeneb the believer and Fly the atheist. And where Otto was an author, Aisha was a reader. In terms of the murder mystery plot, I kind of saw that it was Tamar who killed the businessman and the doctors right away. Also, the writing was pretty much on the wall the minute you see that Otto is insistent on keeping his gun. What I don't know is who killed the taxi drivers. I'm a little confused on that. Honestly though, at this point of the book, it felt completely unnecessary to even have this kind of murderous plot twist. I mean, at this point you have invested so much into essentially a character piece, and then you find out right at the end, all very quickly and in quick succession, that there's a bunch of deaths, and they're fairly gory. Oddly enough, I found this book to be very Canadian. I think it really speaks to the Canadian urban scene, especially places like Montreal. It is strange to say that I think that this book is Canadian though, because I also found Fifth Business to be very Canadian, Robertson Davies, and they're clearly nothing alike in terms of style, in terms of tone, in terms of who these authors were and the times that they lived in and the experiences that they had, and yet they're both such Canadian texts to me. There's a severe tone of placelessness in Carnival, and I think that that is very indicative for a lot of Canadians, especially immigrants. This book was a lot to wrap my head around, and at first the format totally threw me off, and it wasn't until about Act 2 that I was actually enjoying myself and enjoying reading it. It's definitely different. It's definitely not like any of the books that you've read so far, so I would definitely recommend picking it up. When I was preparing to make this video, I realized that there were so many awesome themes that I wanted to explore and so little time to do them in, so I'm really, really excited to be the first one and to know that both Jason and Crowdy are going to be making videos and talking about this book as well throughout the month. I can't wait to hear their reactions in terms of how Canadian they felt the book was, and I can't wait to see their videos, and I can't wait to hear what all of you have to say about the book. Thanks so much for watching. Bye.